Hi, I'm Alicia.
And I'm Robin, and you're listening to Bowel Moments,
the podcast sharing real talk about the realities of IBD. Served on the rocks. This week, we talked to Jason Wild. We talked to him about his ulcerative colitis diagnosis. We talked to him about parenting, traveling, dating, and marriage with ulcerative colitis. We talked to him about his deep involvement and love of a camp for children with inflammatory bowel disease called Camp Oasis. We talked to him about the importance of finding your community, whether it's through camp or other means. And we talked to him about his use of medical marijuana to control his ulcerative colitis. Cheers.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Bowel Moments. This is Robin.
Hey, guys. This is Alicia, and we are delighted to be joined by Jason Wild. We are walking the wild side of IBD tonight. I bet you've never heard that, Jason.
Only once or twice.
I bet. So, like I said, we're excited to have you on, Jason, and we will ask you to tell us your story in just a moment. But first, we're going to ask you, what are you drinking?
I am having a bottle of water this evening. Got to rehydrate. Long day of working around the house.
Ah, I see. Well, then definitely the wild side tonight. Awesome. Robin, what are you drinking?
I am drinking white wine.
Ooh, what kind of white wine?
It's Pinot Grigio. My children just visited me last weekend and it's left over from their visit. So
nice.
You know, I have to finish it off. What about you, Alicia? What are you drinking?
Well, I'm also walking on the wild side over here, and I'm drinking a strawberry Waterloo sparkling water. So, like,
am I the only one having an alcoholic beverage tonight?
I guess you are. I know. I thought I would be because I was like, I have a headache today, and so I was like, I probably shouldn't drink alcohol and make it worse.
Anyway, this show's not about beverages.
It's not.
Jason, welcome to the show. Would you share your IBD story with us?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Good to hear and see you both again. So my IBD story begins in 2014. My girlfriend at the time, now my wife, and I were training for a half marathon. And that alone is shocking news enough. Me running, that's a big one there. But we were training for this half marathon, and 4 weeks out from the marathon date, we were doing one of our longer runs on a Saturday. And I just, my normal time was, through the window, right? I was laboring. It was very hard to achieve my normal routine in that practice. And so I made note of that and, progressed on into the week, and my gut just continued to throb and ache, and I couldn't eat food, and whatever I did eat, it came back up because I was vomiting or it was passing through my system with relative ease. And so that week I went to the hospital, and come to find out, I was diagnosed with something I hadn't heard of up until that point called ulcerative colitis. So after a 2-week stint in the hospital, realizing that certain pain medicines were a trigger of mine, that made me very uncomfortable. So, the long stint really was uncomfortable, so to speak. But after I got out, I'd lost a lot of weight because, again, I wasn't eating. I had a little bit of muscle atrophy from being in the bed for 2 weeks. So I kind of had to relearn a lot of things. And one of them was starting on an exclusion diet. So figuring out what things I can eat and what things I can't drink. That took, a couple of years, right out the get-go. So one of the things that also transpired during those 2 years as I was trying that exclusion diet was also, I hadn't done any research on my UC outside of what my doctor shared with me. I hadn't really investigated support groups or community. And it wasn't until I started coaching high school soccer at Orange High School that I did come across another person with one of the ailments in the IBD family, the sister or brother to ulcerative colitis, if you may, a Crohn. So I had a student athlete on my team whose older brother had Crohn's disease and was an athlete on the team in years prior until he graduated. And so I got close with that family and sharing, a little bit of my story, and they shared theirs and the challenges he had. And it was kind of eye-opening, the things that he was achieving in his life with his disease, even at a young age. I was like, oh, that's relatively interesting. And at the end of the season, they invited me to my first event for the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation. It was one of their fundraisers in downtown Cleveland, and we went along as their guest. And there were 3 guest speakers on top of the silent auctions, the hors d'oeuvres. It was a night, man. They went to the nines for it. It was very glitz and glamorous. So if you know me, you're probably like, what was Jason doing there, right? He's not that kind of guy. But it was a phenomenal evening. But what really stood out to me was the third speaker was a young man, 11, 12 years old, and he spoke about his opportunity where he got to go to a camp and be around other kids with Crohn's or colitis and IBD. And I kind of, you're sitting at a table, right? And you have like a fancy dinner going on, but you're trying to get the attention of your friend you're with or your significant other. And I'm doing like the foot shuffle under the table. I'm bumping Jeannie's elbow and I'm kind of pointing to her. I was like, I think I need to look into this. And she kind of gave me the nod and smile. And, that night I was all energized from this young man and a couple other people I'd spoken to that I jumped online and found this Camp Oasis he was talking about. And so I was scrolling through and looking for different, opportunities because I was like, well, I live here in Ohio, and if there's an Ohio camp, great. But this might be an opportunity to go and see some different areas of the world that I never had an opportunity to. And so scroll on their webpage a little bit more, and I see this location in Colorado at Camp Shady Brook. And I was like, hold on a second. Camp Shady Brook, I used to be the camp director there when I was doing camps, 10, 15 years ago. And so I kind of like did one of those shocking freeze moments and, ran upstairs and told Jeannie, I was like, Jeannie, my camp, it hosts this week. Like, it's destiny, right? Like, I gotta go. It's speaking to me about my gut. My gut is calling out. And so that anxiously awaiting for the online volunteer signups to take place, I look and it wasn't there. And so, I went and talked to my doctors and I was like, hey, I'm interested in finding out about this and, helping me with my ability to cope with my ulcerative colitis and my disease. And so, they reached out and said, oh yeah, it sounds like they don't do any signups until the spring. And I was like, oh, well, this is going to be a long winter. Like, I got to figure out something to do. And so I had done other research. I looked online and I got comfortable understanding again what I was doing with my exclusion diet and really found a good rhythm with my health. I was taking over-the-counter medicines at the time still. So a lot of mesalamine. And then of course we all know it and love it, Robin, our friend, the steroids, right? Gotta have them. And so, all that was taking place during that winter. I found a good rhythm, right? I was in what felt like remission for the first time, right? I wasn't having small flares. I wasn't having the large, big flares. So that winter just felt good. And so going into that spring where I found the camp volunteer applications open up online, I then moved in and applied and, was welcomed back with open arms. And so that experience there was nothing like I'd ever experienced before, right? A community of people that had the same situations, from the volunteers to the med staff themselves that were there volunteering, to the young adults and campers that were there and sharing their stories of, some of these campers had feeding tubes and some of them had injections and some of them had really heavy doses of medicine they were going through or were also on steroids. And, it kind of put me in a position where I was like, hey, I am grateful for my journey up to this point. I was able to handle a lot of these things, but as an adult, having to see some of these young adults or these children that are being plagued with this ailment was very challenging for me that week. When I came back, I really made it an effort to be more vocal about my disease and my own community to maybe help others find opportunities like that. And so that was something that was really, earth shattering for me. And so fast forward 2 more years to 2018, I had started to go back into multiple little flares and medium-sized flares, and actually one big one that had hospitalized me for a long weekend. And I had met someone who had used alternative medicine for his Crohn's disease. So I looked into it and talked to my doctor, and they said that's a good idea if you want to try something like that. We just need to make sure that we're documenting it because it's still very new in Ohio medically. And so I went through the process and got approved for my local card and started a couple different regimens. It took me about 6 months to actually find a good rhythm of balancing the CBD part of medical marijuana with THC. And since then, I've maybe had one medium-sized flare to a handful of small ones, but those are also self-induced because, again, I talked about my exclusion diet. And one of the reasons I also drink water most evenings is because alcohol and beer is actually a trigger of mine. So very rare that I indulge in an alcoholic beverage. I pretty much stay away from it for most days, but like soft cheeses, pizza night, ice cream night, those are all going to be one of those situations. But what's been really nice for me is not having to leverage the steroids unless, that one medium flare. I did ask for a prescription just to get ahead of it, just because I wanted to have it as a security blanket in case something went awry as I was leveraging the higher strands that I had gotten for myself. And, I've been very pleased with the progress to this point. And then, one of the key things about that whole process was balancing traveling for work, right? So some weeks I'd be gone and there would be a state that doesn't have that as a legal opportunity. And so I would not have anything with me. And so I'd come back and I'd have to do little mini recovery opportunities for that. So, luckily I stayed to traveling here in Ohio for the most part right now. But yeah, that was a good chunk of time there. And then we moved forward, and during COVID, it was hard to stay connected with that community because camps were no longer taking place. And so the situation where I could not really outreach to my support community and I didn't have anyone locally, started to really take its toll. And then when I heard camps were starting to get back in session, that part of me kind of reinvigorated, and I reached out to people and said, hey, are we going to get back together? And come to find out there was some reallocation of resources and that camp wasn't going to be taking place anymore, which was rather sad. But I, from a camp background myself, I understand the logistics of it all. But with that brought me another opportunity to oversee one of the camps myself. And so being able to, help other people with this experience and opportunity, and them to, be in that place and actually be the one to help nurture those environments and nurture those opportunities was something that I couldn't put a flame to, so to speak, right? It was just uncomparable to others. And then just now to have that expanded support group and that expanded family has been really, really beneficial for me. So, and that kind of brings us to present day with regards to my IBD journey and my ulcerative colitis. But one of the craziest things for me up until this point is, if I could share anything about that time where I was, first diagnosed or even living with my disease without even knowing it, and then coming to the understanding of my diagnosis, I call it my shut-in period, right? Where I didn't engage with anybody. And then of course my outreach period, which is where I'm at now. But, I encourage people who are newly diagnosed, which we had a handful of them, this past summer, was don't have that shut-in window, right? Like if you need to have a couple days for yourself, great, do whatever you need to do, but don't take 2.5 years like I did. It was a hard time. And, being able to find people and have just open conversations and, just hanging out, it was definitely life-changing for me, right? Because I re-engaged with the one part of my life that was very important to me, and that camp outreach, and then also just finding my sense of community and support moving forward. So those are kind of me A to Z with my IBD journey. If I could do any more rhymes, I would, but I think I ran out there. So
So you were diagnosed very quickly after experiencing symptoms, or after experiencing severe symptoms? Like now that you know more about IBD, were you having symptoms prior to that training, or was it just like that quick onset? Because being diagnosed in 2 weeks is that's phenomenal.
Yeah. So I had not seen any other gastroenterologists or any other physicians about my stomach pain. And it had been there for a couple of weeks, but we were also, adjusting our food intake during that training time. And so I just thought, hey, it's just my body adjusting to maybe some more raw vegetables. And of course, the smoothies in the morning, and, of course, the physical stress. So I said, you know what, I'll take some extra days while I'm training and that. But, now that I look back on it, and like you said, Robin, I have a little bit more education on the ulcerative colitis side of things. It definitely showed a lot earlier, but again, just not being, attributed to any of that information early on, I didn't know. And so I think one thing that also helped them be able to diagnose it quickly was, I didn't have to do any sort of, expulsion of my bowel. It was pretty empty for them to go up there and take a look. So, they did actually 3 scopes while I was in the hospital over those 2 weeks. And so they had a pretty definitive answer. And if not, I was like, well, we're not going back up there. Let's put it that way.
Oh my gosh. Alicia, do you have any questions?
I want to stick with camp for a little bit because you're our first camp director that's been part of this. So we've had other people that have volunteered for camps on, but you're the first person that's really, the one that puts together the programming, because camp is supposed to be fun, but it's also in this case supposed to be educational as well. And so how did you balance putting together programming that allowed people to learn about their disease, connect with each other, but still was mainly fun?
Yeah. And that's a really good question, because some of the things that you want to, focus on at camp is just only the fun aspects, right? You want to do all the activities that camp has to offer. You want to do all the themed recreation aspects that are going on, but you have all these medical professionals that volunteer their time that have such a wealth of knowledge, not to mention just from, their education on the topic, but also just the other volunteers that are there who have done their own research or who have, been in the medical field in that aspect as well, that you want to share those experiences with these kids, because even if it's not, medically related information, maybe it's, hey, how do you cope with participating in this hobby or sport activity with, maybe a bag, right? Or how did you do this after surgery? And so you were able to connect those opportunities for those campers and even the adult volunteers that were there as well. But for me, it was a fine line because, there were so many fun activities that this camp already had in place as I moved into it. It was my first year with them. And so we wanted to really keep the appropriate traditions essentially. And so we carved out during, certain rest hours that the medical team could rotate to each cabin and engage with them with questions that they may have. And then we had an activity period that we called discoveries, where if they wanted to learn more about the medical side of IBD, they could sit down with some of the med staff and, have more in-depth conversations, or what did his education look like if I want to move into this field to support others, which we do see a lot of in the nurse field and doctor field as well. So those were kind of the two big aspects with regards to balancing both the recreation side and the education side for IBD.
That makes sense. And I know that because of previous conversations with you, I know that prior to that, you also worked really hard on creating a leader in training program. So can you tell us about that? And again, how did you add in the right amount of IBD with the right amount of just life skills?
Yeah. So before I moved into the director role with this current camp, I did oversee the LIT program at the previous one when I was just a volunteer. And for me, it was really challenging because before I started with Camp Oasis, I used to be a camp director and an LIT director, and I held so many other positions for youth and teen outreach. And so none of the curriculum that I had anything with regards to medical education. And so that was a real challenge for me to, one, educate myself on what's important in these teens' lives currently. So getting current on pop culture, which, as we all know, there's quite a bit out there now with all the social media. So, having to siphon through a lot of that, but then also, what is some of the most common situations these teens find themselves in? And so, after doing a lot of research and just, outreach and communicating with people, we were able to find a way that these teens were able to, one, have a set of curriculum provided to them where they were learning from us, but then also put them in the same position where they were educating each other, right? There were opportunities to create different games or team building initiatives that either took part of, or, that was in part with their IBD, or was it just some leadership skills that maybe they didn't have an opportunity to because of being very reserved with some of their medical limitations with regards to IBD, right? So it was really a unique challenge to find that balance. But once the legwork was put in and seeing how these teens came out on the other side of it and how they grew over that week was phenomenal. And hearing about it now, right? I think we're almost, 4 to 5 years removed from our first engagement together in these camp situations. And so, seeing these young adults now out in the world and what they're doing, you think it pays off and you kind of continue to hope that it does. So a lot of good work with that.
I sincerely hope so, because I know how hard you worked at it. So it's nice to see that it worked.
Absolutely.
Okay. So I appreciate you sticking with camp for a little bit because it is such a great, phenomenal program and such an important way for kids to connect. Let's talk treatment, because we were particularly excited to have you on because we just had Dr. Jami Kinnucan on not too long ago talking about the sort of doctor side of utilizing marijuana as treatment. And then we know this about you, that you use this as a treatment. So this is great to get the patient perspective on this as well. So talk to us about the entire process of how did you go about even thinking about this as a treatment? It sounded like somebody had given you the idea. What type of research did you do? And then how did you approach your doctor to talk to the doctor about using this?
Yeah. So like I had mentioned previously, so one of my colleagues, he was using medical marijuana at the time and had informed me of some of the benefits he had been receiving of it. He was still balancing some over the counters and some prescriptions, but he had said that mostly he had positive experiences with it. And for me, I was always very against just the recreational use of marijuana to begin with. So for me, it was kind of actually a very challenging mental hurdle to overcome, to even attempt to have a conversation about it. So after talking with a few people and understanding, there's different ways to, avoid some of the side effects that people actually look forward to in marijuana, right? I then went and did some online research, right? First off, was it legal in Ohio, which come to find out it was. was. And then I just reached out to some of the people I knew in my UC community to see if they were using it or had tried it for anything. And unfortunately, the direct contacts I had not. And so then when I went to my next doctor's appointment for a checkup and to get some blood work done, it was honestly point blank, right? I didn't want to beat around the bush. I just said, hey, I've been hearing some people had success with using medical marijuana. I believe I am interested. And the reason I asked him so point blank was because I did not like the way my prescription drugs made me feel. And of course, like I mentioned earlier, the steroid side of things, right? And so I wanted to really just try something new. I was open to anything. If you have ulcerative colitis or Crohn's, you understand sometimes the pun intended gut-wrenching pain that you go through, right? And so, to find that relief, I was willing to give this a shot, especially if they've been doing their due diligence to make it, medically available. I started to come around mentally, right? I was talking myself into it more and more. And then, I just started to have more of the confidence in believing in it. So here in Ohio, your regular, medical doctor, whether it's a gastro or someone you go see for pain and things of that nature, they're not able to prescribe it unless they are licensed to be a medical marijuana physician. So I was recommended a physician who I went and spoke to and, shared with him my situation with ulcerative colitis. And he said, you know what, you seem like you'd be a perfect candidate for this. If you're interested in trying it, we'll go ahead and sign the paperwork and we'll get you licensed in about a month after everything clears with the background checks. I said, okay, let's give it a shot. A month and a half later, I get the email saying that I'm approved. And there it is in my email is my first medical marijuana card. I showed my wife and we just kind of laughed. And, Jason, like 7 years ago would have just been up in arms if I'd even thought of this, right? Yeah, like how, pointing the finger, So, I went the next week and, I told my medical marijuana physician and my regular physician I was going to go and pick up a couple things that they had recommended to start with, a low THC, CBD content and see if you feel anything different. And we go from there. So the most challenging aspect of the first couple months was having mini flares every once in a while because it was almost like an exclusion diet with my medical marijuana. There was no, strands, there was no process in place for, hey, just take this and your problems will go away. So, I had talked to my one buddy who I had mentioned had been using it and he said, yeah, it was trial and error. So I started out with focusing strictly on CBD aspect of the flower. And I know people probably say, well, you can get CBD anywhere now, Jason. Why do you get a medical marijuana card for it? Part of my research that I found out is that they actually are able to manufacture different aspects of the CBD oil and the CBD flower because they can handle the THC side of things in the factory. And so for me, there's the higher medical benefits of the CBD aspect of it. And if it's being, encapsulated right from the start and not like second or third tier down the road, that's where I want to go to get it. So started off with that. Again, a couple of weeks that were a little more challenging than others, but I found a rhythm. I found an initial rhythm and I went with it and saw, okay, after the first couple of weeks, I needed to adjust it a little bit more. And then I found that sweet spot, right? Like I found where my comfort zone was, where I was happy, where I was feeling good and I didn't have any side effects that I did not want. And so, I documented it. I shared it with both my physicians and they said, okay, let's just continue to monitor and document and we'll go from there. And so I've had to make 2 adjustments since I've started, not anything crazy or erratic, but I'm ecstatic for where I'm at now and how I'm using it. It's been really nice to have that and not feel the side effects of certain prescription drugs and have to go to biologicals or injections yet because I was so, low on the totem pole with the type of prescriptions I was getting. So I'm definitely in a happy place with it.
When you went to the dispensary, were they helpful? Like, did you explain to them, like, this is my situation and did they have suggestions for you? Or how did you even get to the products to try? I think it would be a little overwhelming.
Yeah, that's a great question. It was at first because you walk in and it was just like going to a deli, right? They've got their wall with the different flowers or cuts of meat up there, right? And then you see the price per ounce, per pound, not per pound, they weren't selling it that large, but you get the idea, right? You see it up on the big board. And so you kind of look at it and you're like, what am I even supposed to ask for? I knew what I was going to ask for, but I didn't know like, which was which, right? Was the purple gorilla the one that I needed, or was it the forest mushroom? What's going on here? So went up and I kind of explained myself. But what I found out was because this was so new in Ohio still, that not a lot of the representatives are as educated as well. So it's kind of like, you go to Home Depot, right? And you see some of the teenage kids. Yeah, they may have some knowledge of stuff and how to build certain things if you're trying to bounce ideas off them, but they're not going to be able to go too in depth with with a lot of those questions, right? So they were able to pass me off to someone who had been around it a little bit more and was able to guide me, at least initially. And then once I kind of understood more of the route I was going and I did my research and, then they started publishing their information online for that day, I could make my plan of attack, so to speak, when I go in.
Have you had a scope since this started? Because as a patient, I'm more curious about, like you're saying, you're mostly symptom free and that's what you're looking for, but has it affected like your endoscopic results? Basically, you're in symptom remission if you're, not experiencing symptoms, but does that also show up on your scopes?
Yeah, that's something that we were concerned about in the beginning. So I wasn't scheduled to be on a scope within the first 2 years of using my medical marijuana. So once year 2 came around and we did do our scope, there was no situations that would cause us any alarm. And then I had one last year as well. And again, same result, nothing that is kind of proving us to be in an alarm situation or maybe adjust what we're doing. So yeah, that's awesome. Really comforting to hear. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
I'm curious about, how did you talk to your employer about this? Like, do they have to know that you're using this? Because, some places do drug testing. And then also, I know you travel for your job. So how do you handle traveling? Because it's not legal in every state and not legal federally yet. So 2 job related questions there.
Yes. What she said.
Yeah. So when I first started, I should preface this, before I even went down that route, I did go to my employer and I just said, hey, I'm looking at this type of treatment for my ulcerative colitis. If it prohibits my work engagement, I will, pursue something else. And they said, no, as long as you're not using it during company hours, which of course I do not. I have a scheduled time in the evening where I do it, but you got to clear all the air, right? So yeah, there was no conflict from that side of things. So then I was able to pursue it from there. But with travel, it is a little bit more challenging because, like you had alluded to, Alicia, some of the states that I travel to for work, it is not legal there yet from either a medical side or a recreational side. And one of the things about my medical license here in Ohio is I can't travel with it outside of the state to begin with. So when I do travel, I actually don't take anything with me. And so I will, usually I'm not gone for more than a day or 2 at a time. So it's not anything too challenging on my system. I just stay away from a lot of my trigger foods, pretty basic, chicken, overcooked vegetables. That's usually a safe bet for me. And then when I get back, I just maintain my routine.
Yeah, that would be a real challenge to figure it out, because you're like, you have to know exactly what states it's legal in and how, so that's really interesting. And I'm curious, now that you've started doing this, are you meeting more people who are interested in it? Have you found community around this as well?
So this is an area that I tend to not speak up too much about, because I don't want to influence people outside of more just providing them the opportunity to have an open conversation about it with their physicians, right? So if someone does come up and ask me, or they notice that I don't take any medicines or I don't have something checked in, I have shared that with them. But for me, it's more, just saying, hey, I've and this is honestly the blanket statement I give most people is, it's been great for me. I found a good rhythm that works for not only my system, but my lifestyle. If you're interested in something like this, I encourage you to talk to your physician. And honestly, I sound like a broken record when I say it like that, because it sounds very scripted, but it's true, because, so many people have had a taboo thought process on medical marijuana and of course just marijuana in general. But for me, because it is still one of those things where, again, in Ohio, it's only available medically, that I just want to make sure that I'm communicating to people, hey, it works for me for what I use it for. If you've got questions, do your research, go online, talk to physicians. And I encourage you to have that open conversation, right? Don't go and take my word for it and say, hey, this guy's doing it, right? And like, no. Make your own decisions, go and do your research. Like, I just want to be a resource to say, hey, it has worked for me. So if you're interested, go. Doesn't hurt to ask questions.
Yeah. And that pretty much is what Dr. Kinnucan said when she was on the show too. Like, most physicians are open to, talking to you about it. So I echo what Jason said, everybody. If you're listening and you're interested in this and it is legal in your state, talk to your doctor about it.
And even frankly, if you don't talk to your doctor about it first, which we don't advise, still let your doctor know you're using it if you do start to use it, because they do want to know about it. And I mean, Jami mentioned there was at least one interaction between cannabis and a prescription medication. So it's important to bring that up with your provider. Okay. Thank you for your honesty on that and your openness, because I know, like you said, you don't share it too openly. And so we appreciate you doing it with us. I want to back you up a teensy bit, because you mentioned that when you were diagnosed, you and and your then girlfriend were training, but she was still a then girlfriend and she became a wife. So in the midst of this, of you being ill, this woman then became your wife. So was this a conversation you guys had before you got married? Because now you've also gone ahead and had some kids like people normally do. Has this been kind of a conversation with y'all? How has this interplayed in your relationship?
Yeah, it's definitely present. I'll start with that. It's very present in our relationship because there are certain mornings, like I mentioned, the trigger foods that limit me some mornings, right? Maybe I just have, a morning where I need a couple extra minutes to just kind of get myself together and then I can move on with the day. So she's understandable of that, which is huge, right? Her support from day one to now and continuing to move forward is, something that it's a part of my support system, right? Like, the biggest person in your life in those situations are the ones closest to you. And outside of my parents and even her parents, Jeannie has been my A1 from day one when it comes to that. So definitely can't do it without her. But to kind of go back to the beginning, she, and like I mentioned, we were still boyfriend, girlfriend at the time. She was in the hospital with me every night. She came every day. Most nights she stayed over. If she couldn't stay over because at one point I had to share a room, she was down the street at one of her family members and then came back and saw me in the morning before she went to work back, 20 miles away. So having that support system was amazing. But the key thing that's really made us this successful to this point is the communication aspect of it, right? From what drugs I'm taking, the prescriptions that I'm taking, what my body's doing, do I feel up for certain things, especially early on, right? When I was still recovering, what could my body do? What can I handle? To now where it's like, hey, I'm thinking about trying medical marijuana. Like, what? You don't do any of that stuff. Like, what are you thinking? And so it's been an interesting dynamic, but without the open line of communication that we have just in general in our relationship, we would not have been able to overcome a lot of the challenges of this third wheel, so to speak, which is my IBD and ulcerative colitis. So I'm definitely sure that it has been just as challenging for her as it's challenging for me, right? Like we feel the physical pain of it all, and she felt a lot of the emotional pain of it all, right? Because seeing me limited in certain situations, seeing me unhappy and seeing just in pain, Robin, I'm sure you can relate to a lot of that, right? With your significant other, right? So it's definitely a challenge when you see what they see in their eyes as we're going through a lot of those things. To kind of put a bow on it, without the communication, we wouldn't be where we're at now. But I will say, a close second would just be understanding, right? I need to understand that I need to communicate everything about this disease with her because of how dynamic ulcerative colitis and Crohn's is, that if I am just thinking that she knows what I'm going through or that I'm in a situation, then I'm in the wrong place, right? I'm in the wrong because I'm assuming and I'm thinking that she understands what's going on. But we need to have a little bit more of that communication and then the nonverbal communication to get there and be successful.
I'm curious if when you did decide to have children, whether there was any conversation between you and your wife and or you and your doctor about the genetics of inflammatory bowel disease and concerns about passing it on. That's question number one about parenting. Question number two about parenting is, your children are still relatively small, is my recollection. How are you talking to them? How are you starting these conversations with them about you having ulcerative colitis and how that may affect your ability to do fun things, parent them at times?
So we did have the conversation about potentially passing on the UC trait and the IBD gene to our kids, but it wasn't something we were concerned about to an extent, right? It's definitely something I still think about now, especially having two kids and one on the way. But it's more of, the information is progressing so much. People are getting the access to care that they need that, will be, sad if that does transpire in our kids' lives, but understanding that you can still overcome this challenge and be able to do whatever it is you want to do, right? So we weren't hesitant in that. And because of that, we did not seek out any additional information from my physician or even from like an OBGYN as well. Now, with regards to communicating to my kids about my disease, my oldest turns 4 in October. And then we have a 2.5-year-old now. So, they can barely remember what they had for breakfast that morning some days. So it does make it a little bit more challenging. But my son does understand that there are certain mornings that I am a little slower out of bed than others. And when I did have one of my medium flares earlier this year, he was very, very supportive in bringing me Gatorade and said, "Here, Daddy, let me kiss your tummy to make it feel better." So that just plays along with his character as it is, right? He's just a very loving and sweet boy to begin with. But, he was was very nurturing. And he just understands that, hey, everyone gets sick. People don't feel well. We just help them when they're feeling bad. And so, yeah, I'm sure once he gets a little bit older and he understands what's going on, he'll ask more questions and, maybe want to understand a little bit more of why daddy isn't feeling good some mornings or some days, why he can't eat ice cream every night. Like, I mean, that's the questions kids always ask their parents, right? Or why can't we have pizza every day and every meal as a family? So we're treading the water lightly right now. Daddy just has an upset tummy. It's feeling ouchy for him today, but I'm sure we'll navigate those waters probably pretty soon in the next couple of years.
I really feel like I'm going to start describing my pain as an ouchie. I mean, that just sounds so much better. I just have an ouchie today. Also, this is totally off topic and I don't know why this struck me. You have said small, medium, and large flares. And I really feel like we're ordering our flares off of a fast food menu. Like, I would like a small flare today. Oh, you could give me a medium one. Oh no, supersize it. I got a supersized flare today. I don't know why just then when you said small flare, medium flare, it triggered me. I'm like, we are ordering our flares off of a menu. And
I mean, that is a good question, Robin. Like, quantify your flares for us, Jason. Like, what does constitute a small and or medium flare for you?
Right.
Yeah. So a small flare would be like the early morning discomfort. I maybe need an hour or two. Like, I need to lay down a little longer than what would allow me to wake up. Right. So, normally I'm up between 6 and 7:30 and I'm out the door with the kids and we're starting our day. But some days maybe it's like an 8:30, maybe almost 9 o'clock would be a small type of a flare, right? Like I said, I had pizza the night before, I had ice cream the night before, I had both. Who knows? A medium flare would be something along the lines of like multi-day discomfort, but something that is able to be worked through, such as going to work and maintaining my daily routine. But there is a time where it crescendos, for you music lovers at home, it crescendos to something where it takes me out of my routine for longer than just the morning, or it's sporadically throughout the day or evening. I call those a medium flare just because it's more of a medium detriment to my day. And then the large flares are going to be my go see the doctor, go get a blood test. Maybe I'm out for a whole day. And then to Robin's note, the super size, that's a hospital stay. That's a go get the IV fluids, get me some pain meds. Let's get you back up on your feet because you can't do that one alone. But I haven't had a super size flare in quite a while.
No supersized flares. You have too much stuff to do. You have a
right.
baby on the way.
Jason, one of the things you wanted to talk about and one of the things that has been kind of the running theme through all of the things you've said is really the importance of community when you have inflammatory bowel disease. So talk to us about why that was something important to you to discuss.
It's really important to me because even before having UC, right, before my diagnosis, I was a part of a lot of different programs where there was a sense of community, whether it was the sports teams that I participated on in high school and college, or it was the teen leadership groups I was a part of through different, nonprofit organizations. And so I always had these people that I could talk to with the different topics that were going on with regards to that specific area, right? So I had, soccer, we talked about different sports, and swimming, we always had our NCAA games and things of that nature, right? So those little pods of community were always very important to me and helped me become a lot of who I am, to this point. And so, as I got older, I continued to have sport teams that I was a part of, recreational as an adult. And then there were, the different nonprofit groups that I was on the board for and I was being a part of and engaged, whether it was the soccer league or another nonprofit that served youth in the community. And when I got diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, I didn't have a person even early on to talk to a lot about that, let alone a whole community or a group of people that I could rely on or bounce ideas off of or just, share the misery of that day. Right. And so, through those 2 years, it was very challenging. And, it was almost like when I think back and I start to put these comparisons together, a lot of times, when we went through COVID, there was a lot of isolation and that was on a much grander scale. Right. But it felt like that for me because I always had a different group that I could reach out to for all the things going on in my life. And, fast forward to finding, little mini pods, right? A couple colleagues here and there, or some people just out in the wild, as I call it, out around the streets. One of my neighbors, he even has, Crohn's disease. And it felt good to be able to talk about it, right? Like I'd be going on a walk in my neighborhood and he'd walk by and say, hey, how you been feeling lately? Like I could actually tell him, well, this, and this, right? And he would then follow up and share a little bit of his. And we were able to dialogue and just had that connection about, about it. And then when I moved into coaching and found that other contact, like I mentioned, my family that had the son with Crohn's, and then invited me to that foundation event, being able to just to talk to people. Granted, they didn't get brought into my own community, but just sharing experiences and hearing about others, and even talking to people who were in the medical field with some of the advances they were making in a lot of the studies. It was just really awesome to then find that. And so when I shared the story about how I found out about camp and that opportunity to engage with people just like me who had a similar drive, who had a similar passion for the camp environment, it just seemed like, hey, I think I might have found that larger sense of community, that larger pod that I wanted to be a part of. And then being able to navigate that and create connections with people that I still communicate with to this day. One person, she is getting married soon, and she had her bachelorette party, a couple months ago. And I saw that some of our friends were there. And so I sent her a couple bucks to go out and buy drinks, right? Like that's just, that's the type of community that I had always been a part of. And being able to have that now with this disease that has always been very challenging for me to not only live with, but to even communicate about, and trying to, overcome that sense of embarrassment or shame, which, why do you even have it to begin with, right? So it was very monumental to find that sense of community, and not only just find it and embrace it, but to be welcomed into it as well. That's huge. And I encourage anybody who's listening that, isn't sure if there's that type of community out there for them, or maybe they're early on in their journey with IBD and Crohn's and colitis, find that little niche, right? It makes a whole world of difference when you do it. It took a career that I used to have that got turned into a non-career and, non-factor in my life, and brought it back in as a major passion of mine. And being able to kind of refocus that energy for good, and, understand that, hey, this pain comes with something a little bit greater now. It's a little bit more bearable on those small, medium, and large flares when they come up, and I'm laying there in bed wallowing over the abdominal pain. So it's definitely very pivotal to find that sense of community.
That's interesting, because that really is a theme, I think, in all of our patient interviews that we've done so far, is that real importance of having a group of people around you who you don't have to explain it. You don't have the me's going, hey, can you please tell me exactly what a small, medium, and large flare is? Like you don't explain anything. They just get it. When you say, you know what, today's kind of a not great day, they all just kind of nod and go, yeah, I gotcha. It's really lovely that there is a community out there for people who need it. And, I feel fortunate that this podcast gets to be a tiny piece of that, and that we bring stories like yours to other people, because they can relate to you. They can look at your story and go, yeah, I get it. I get that guy. I'm like him.
I'm going to ask the hard-hitting questions that everyone's been waiting for. I need to talk to you about your athletic prowess. We are speaking to a 3-time spring intramural bowling champion. Did I get that right?
You are in the presence of greatness. Yes. Yes, thank you. Thank you. I'll be here for a couple more minutes, I think. But yes, my college years, my formidable years, a few friends and myself, we looked at the intramural sheet and we were like, what are we going to do? And bowling just jumped right out at us. So we got a team together, and every Tuesday night, it was a bowling night down the road. We were never good in the fall. It was always terrible. For some reason, we could never get our acts together. But for some reason, springtime, I don't know if it was the change in weather, or if it was the smoggy, smoky bowling alley lanes, because they were still allowed to do that back then. But something just clicked inside, and we just would tear those oil patterns up and knock those pins down. And yeah, for somehow 3 spring semesters in a row, we just demolished the competition.
Did your team have a name that you?
Well, we don't. It was a dumb name. No, it's not. It's very insensitive.
Okay, we won't share it then.
Yeah, no, we were not the brightest young adults back then.
We
thought we were a lot funnier than we were.
We all do dumb stuff when we're young. I love that you chose like intramural bowling. I think that's hilarious, because I chose intramural rugby, so perhaps yours was a better choice.
And not as many injuries.
Yeah, that's kind of what stopped my intramural rugby career, and why I don't have any championships under my belts. So
I also think it's because in the fall, I couldn't go as hard at bowling because I was a collegiate swimmer. So I obviously had to save myself. I can't get any sprained fingers or stubbed toes on the bowling alley lane, because that could really affect me in the water. So, that's probably why I did so bad in the fall semesters.
Yeah.
Because I was saving myself for the spring semester, and I just came out.
That must be it.
Yeah. I really think that's a logical explanation. I don't know about your other teammates, but it makes sense for you. They just didn't pick up the slack.
Yeah, we all fed off each other's energy. And if I came with negative energy, we tanked. We were trying to get better draft picks, bad sports analogies.
Is that how that goes? Robin's just shaking her head at you.
I don't think that's how that works. I don't think that's how any of that works.
Nope. No. Well, Jason, it is always a pleasure to talk to you, but we are going to close it out here by asking you if you had one piece of advice for the IBD community, what would it be?
Man, one piece of advice. I think honestly, it's kind of what I've touched on a few different times throughout our conversation today, right? Is not being afraid to communicate with anybody about your disease and finding those people that can align themselves with what you're going through and be there to support you, right? Communication is key when it comes to really advancing your self-help with regards to your ulcerative colitis. And when you're able to communicate with the right people and then create that sense of community, it's a game changer. And if you would have told me, within those first 2 years of my diagnosis that I'd be doing what I'm doing now with my disease and helping so many people and helping them find other people to communicate with that, I probably would have been, laughing in your face. Honestly, I would not have been able to put those things together. But because of the opportunities in the community that I found, I find myself here now. Of course, it led me to our first meeting that amazing week back in 2016. So, I'm very grateful for all the people it's brought into my life and the community that I get to share it with.
It's pretty special, that's for sure. Well, Jason, thank you again so very much. So we'll end this podcast by saying thank you so much, Jason, for joining us. And thank you so much for our audience for listening, and cheers.
Cheers.
Hey guys, it's Jason. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, subscribe, and share with a friend.